Welcome in. Happy hour. Another round of 49ers Intel after day 14 of training camp practice. Brock Purdy, a couple interceptions today. That's what I wrote about. And I wrote about Kyle Shanahan's reaction to those interceptions on The Athletic. 49ers Kyle Shanahan isn't worried about Brock Purdy's training camp interceptions. There you have it. The title tells you what this story is about. But there are some interesting quotes from Kyle Shanahan in there and some interesting numbers, and we're going to go through some of them because I tweeted some of those out as well. So we'll talk about them on the show. If you want to take a look at this article, well, I am copying and pasting the link to it right now. It is in the description, but I can go ahead and toss it into the chat section of this piece as well. So welcome in. We are live indeed. Here is the link to the article. You should definitely check it out because The Athletic, I think, is only about $2 a month. And this is your best spot for 49ers coverage. Bar none, William Floyd, bar none, 49ers fullback from the glory days of the 1990s. Matt Barrows also writes for us. Tim Kawakami had a really nice piece about Brock Purdy, Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo, the Jimmy Garoppolo-Kyle Shanahan relationship, which obviously was tense and obviously ended after 5 seasons, but it was very productive. And those two, it seemed like they got the best of each other over the years. That was a really good piece that came out this morning. So make sure you check that out. But do check out my piece here from practice today. This is 49ers Intel as the dog days of camp continue. 49ers will move on to practice number 15 tomorrow. Then they're going to take Friday off from practice, but they'll have a walkthrough. Saturday is preseason week 2 game against the Denver Broncos. That's at Levi Stadium. The 49ers play the Chargers the following Friday. That will wrap up the preseason. And then on August 29th, they will cut the roster down from 90 players to 53. So everything that we talk about will be in the context of that cut down because the 49ers have to field a competitive roster and a competitive 16-man practice squad. So it's 53 plus 16 so that they can be true Super Bowl contenders when this journey begins on September 10th at Pittsburgh. So the dog days of camp continue, and I have several things I want to talk about. The first of which starts with today's article. Brock Purdy, he has now thrown 10 interceptions on training camp. 10. That's not a little. That's quite a few interceptions. In fact, over his about 197 attempts, so about 200 attempts, that's a 5.1% interception rate. For comparison purposes, an interception rate of about 2.1 or 2.2% is the league average for NFL quarterbacks, but that is the in-game league average. We're talking about practice, like Allen Iverson, practice for Brock Purdy, where it's 5.1%. So that's what I wrote about in this piece, and I definitely have some context for you. This right here is the biggest load of context because I've tracked training camp interception percentages for the past 3 seasons, dating back to 2021. So I also wanted to include season interception percentages just to give you an idea of what's going on. So here you'll see Purdy's 2023 camp is at the bottom. I said he has a 5.1% interception rate. You're going to wonder, is that high? Is that low? How does that compare to previous years? And how does Purdy do in actual games versus practices? Well, in 2023, that 5.1% is actually lower than Brock Purdy's interception rate from last season as a rookie, 5.9%. So let that marinate for a little bit. Brock Purdy blew the socks off of Kyle Shanahan last year, working against the third team with a nearly 6% interception rate. That's not low. That's really high. I mean, if he was throwing that during the regular season, I don't think he would be in position to play. But it was good enough during training camp for Kyle Shanahan to be impressed. And it's a good thing that Kyle Shanahan was impressed because during the season, this includes the regular season games and the playoffs, Purdy threw only 4 interceptions and his interception rate was only 1.7%. So what we have here is Purdy throwing quite a few picks this training camp, just like he threw quite a few picks last training camp. But in both training camps, over 5% interception rate. So far, we haven't seen a regular season rate that's worse than the league average for Brock Purdy. That being said, he's only played in 1 regular season plus those 3 playoff games. But the data so far indicates that Purdy throws picks in practice because he's probably approaching things a little bit differently than he does during the game, which obviously is what the 49ers would like. They want you to push and test the limits during practice so that you know where those limits are so you don't cross them during the game. For further comparison, we could see Jimmy Garoppolo's 2021 training camp, a 3.1% interception rate. He lowered it during the season, 2.7%. Garoppolo didn't participate in training camp last season. He was working out on the side field before he re-signed with the 49ers, but he did bring the interception rate down to 1.3%. If anything, maybe we've learned something. Maybe quarterbacks shouldn't participate in training camp, and then they could lower their interception rate to top 5 in the league, like Jimmy Garoppolo did last season. All kidding aside, training camp and games are different things. Practices and games are different things. I get the question so much, David, why are you focusing so much on Trey Lance's short throws, but then, looking at Brock Purdy's interceptions a little bit differently? Well, it's because I'm not a robot. I think I'm smarter than a robot, so I could look at everything contextually. And that's what you have to do when you evaluate a player. For example, Sam Darnold has a much different weakness, a much different documented weakness than both Trey Lance and Brock Purdy. Darnold's weakness is he's thrown way too many interceptions. He's seen ghosts in the past. So when we evaluate Sam Darnold's practice play, we have to evaluate it through the context of his biggest weakness, which is those interceptions. Darnold, to his credit, has thrown only one pick in training camp so far. So we focus on that interception rate. We focus on the poor decisions from Sam Darnold. In the case of Brock Purdy, interceptions aren't an issue, or they haven't been an issue in actual games. Again, 1.7%. That's a low interception rate from last season. A lot of people will say, oh, he had dropped picks. Brock Purdy, even with dropped interceptions factored in, and this is the turnover-worthy play stat from Pro Football Focus, even with those factored in, Brock Purdy had one of the 10 best turnover-worthy throw rates in football. He was better than even Tom Brady in that regard last year. So we don't view Brock Purdy through a prism of inaccuracy or through a prism of turnovers. I mean, they just haven't been an issue for him so far in his career. He gets the benefit of the doubt for the time being in practice because last year he also threw a bunch of picks in practice. And today, Kyle Shanahan said this, and I'll read this to you from the article. This is going to be up on The Athletic. The link is in the description. Kyle Shanahan, quote, "You never want interceptions in any situation," Shanahan said. "There's never one answer. Each one's different. But I definitely like having interceptions more in practice than in games." And one thing Brock does is he lets it rip. He's not worried about anything else, especially not worried about people counting his interceptions at practice. A little bit of a shot or a nod to us. But as you can tell, Kyle Shanahan said the same thing about Brock Purdy as he said about Trey Lance. Lance's touchdown in the preseason game should have been an interception, right? It was almost intercepted, but the interception was dropped and it turned into a score. But Kyle Shanahan was actually complimentary of Trey Lance's decision-making process on the play. He said, and I quote, that he was happy that Trey Lance let it rip. Well, look what he said about Brock Purdy here. One thing Brock does is he lets it rip. He's happy that Brock lets it rip. He's happy that Trey Lance lets it rip in situations that don't count, preseason games and practice. He wants that aggressiveness. He wants the quarterback to find where the limits are. And then once the quarterback finds where the limits are, he can back off of those limits. And as long as the regular season interception rate is low enough, and for Brock Purdy last season, it definitely was low enough. Well, if that happens, then Kyle Shanahan is happy with the overall efficiency. So that's where we are with Brock Purdy. I'll give you the details of what happened today at practice if you want to know. The two interceptions. The first one went to Curtis Robinson, the linebacker out of Stanford. Underneath, Purdy was going for Kyle Juszczyk on a shorter throw. Might not have seen Curtis Robinson, might have been forcing that ball in there, might have been trying to squeeze it into a tight window. Until we actually see the all-22, which we usually don't from practice, we won't be 100% sure. That was actually a really entertaining play because Robinson, after picking it off, started returning the other way. But you got to give Kyle Juszczyk credit for a heads-up play. He stripped the ball from Curtis Robinson, so it turned into a fumble after the interception. And then Brock Purdy recovered that fumble. So it was actually a first down for the 49ers. Second interception today came in the red zone where Brock Purdy was actually really good for the 49ers. Two touchdown passes to Ayuk and Samuel, both laser beam throws. I mean, one was a laser beam. One was a perfectly placed lob, like an arc. It was a good spiral, good little rainbow arch. That one went to Ayuk. The other throw to the other pylon went to Deebo Samuel. Anyway, in between those two throws, he tried to go to Brandon Ayuk on the slant. And this is actually good news for the 49ers because Deommodore Lenoir is a cornerback who they're looking for an encore from, right? He was really good down the stretch last year. Lenoir absolutely manned up Brandon Ayuk. I mean, physical coverage. He was right there on the slant to the point where the throw from Purdy was, it just had a squeeze in there, and it would have had to have been completely perfect execution from Brandon Ayuk and Brock Purdy on the play. And even then, it might not have been good enough because the coverage was so good. And it was completely perfect coverage from Deommodore Lenoir. He manned up with Deebo Samuel. They both went up to try to get the football, and that one clanged up in the air because Lenoir was all over it. The deflection turned into an interception for Tashaun Gibson Sr., who was a king of interceptions. He's got 32 in his career. So this 49ers secondary is for real. In fact, I can give you this stat. This is some more good context on the Brock Purdy interceptions. Last season in training camp, the 49ers logged 20 interceptions as a defense. That was Trey Lance, quarterback one. He got the majority of the snaps. This season in training camp, the 49ers already have 15 interceptions, and they're not even done yet. Last year, the interceptions in training camp for the 49ers defense translated into interceptions on the field for the 49ers defense. They led the NFL with 20 interceptions in the regular season. Now, there was another team that also had 20, so the 49ers were co-leaders at number one in the NFL. That other team was the Pittsburgh Steelers. Guess who's the week one opponent for the 49ers? The Pittsburgh Steelers. So if you're worried about Brock Purdy's interception rate, well, he gets to face one of the best INT defenses in the league on the road in week one to open the season. But I can tell you, and I wrote about this in the piece, it does not seem that Kyle Shanahan is worried about Brock Purdy's interception rate. He's happy that he's pushing the limits in practice. I mean, today, Purdy had, I thought, maybe his most impressive throw physically at practice since returning from the elbow injury. Is a deep shot to Brandon Ayuk. I wrote all about it in the piece. You can check it out. There might have been a sack on the play, and you have to give credit to the defense. But again, I chart for accuracy. I'm not sitting there charting, what may or may not be a sack. I put it in my notes, but I don't take away completions and attempts for these sacks because it doesn't make any sense. We're limited in what we can evaluate as it is. Why would we limit ourselves in trying to evaluate accuracy? So in looking at Purdy's arm strength and accuracy, the defense didn't stop playing. Brandon Ayuk was sprinting down the sideline. Talanoa Hufanga was coming over the top, high safety position. There had to be velocity on this throw of about 40 to 45 yards from the sideline to the sideline from Brock Purdy to fit it into Brandon Ayuk before Hufanga came over the top and decapitated him. And there was plenty of velocity on the throw. So to me, seeing that mustard from a guy who just about, 5 months ago underwent elbow surgery, the internal brace to repair the torn UCL, to see that throw with velocity, 40 to 45 yards outside the numbers, down the field, completion to Brandon Ayuk, that was important to me. And that the 49ers, they want to see Purdy physically back. That's been kind of the first checkpoint that they've had to attain. We're about 3 weeks into training camp, and I think that checkpoint has been attained for the 49ers. They think that Purdy looks physically fine, and guess what? They took the pitch count off. Brock is going to be out there tomorrow throwing for a third consecutive day for the first time since its March 10th surgery. And that, when you zoom out and put into context, to me, is really, really jaw-dropping because March 10th, 6 months from that day to September 10th, which is the season opener against Pittsburgh, there was initially fear and I think just resignation to the fact that it wasn't a fact, or to the assumption that Brock Purdy was his recovery timetable run up all the way to week one, that he wasn't going to be able to get much of a training camp in because 6 months would be 6 months from March 10th to September 10th. That ended up not being the case. He was ready to throw 4 months after the surgery, way ahead of schedule. 4.5 months after the surgery, he was in a fully operational 49ers practice. And now we're at about 5 months after the surgery, and Brock Purdy is throwing well in training camp, throwing with mustard, throwing with velocity. He's got those 10 picks, but again, context absolutely matters. And I have the context for you right here. 5.1%, just like 5.9% last year. And the in-season rate is what's going to matter. You're going to start game planning for teams, and the 49ers hope that Purdy can start avoiding interceptions in that regard. Shanahan's quote, I think, is really, really telling. Talks about us tracking interceptions at practice like it's a ridiculous deal. And it is the context, but it's all about context. And the context through which most people deliver Brock Purdy interceptions, I think, is lacking. They don't talk about what Kyle Shanahan said. They don't talk about the fact that practice is different than games, that the objectives are different in both scenarios. They don't talk about the fact that Purdy also threw a bunch of interceptions last year in training camp, and he still blew the 49ers away. So just keep all those things in mind as we wait with bated breath for the 49ers season opener on September 10th against the Pittsburgh Steelers, who tied with the 49ers for the NFL lead and 20 interceptions last season. All right, the Trey Lance situation. I didn't do a 49ers intel yesterday, so I'm happy to do one today. I did one talking about Lance after the game on Sunday. So Lance has been just this lightning rod name in both the local and the national media. People just can't stop talking about this. So we're going to address it as well. But to me, again, whenever there is just such insane discourse about one player, why don't we just sit back and reevaluate how we've talked about Trey Lance over the past few weeks and see if some of our takes and some of our assertions from 3 weeks ago have held up? Because then you could usually pick apart who's telling the truth and who's not in a situation like this, right? You could tell who's evaluating this correctly. And I do have to say that basically every pillar of what we reported about Trey Lance 3 to 4 weeks ago is shining through right now. One of the things I talked about and continue to talk about a lot is that Lance is a raw prospect, especially in relation to Brock Purdy. Brock had 4 years of college starting football under his belt at a major D1 school in Iowa State. Trey Lance didn't. Trey Lance had like 2 years in between his last action at FCS North Dakota State and the start of his NFL career, which has been way pushed back, really, because the development has been because of a finger injury in 2021 and an ankle injury in 2022. So entering camp, I was saying, well, Purdy's got a whole lot more experience than Trey Lance, and that's not even counting all the experience that Purdy developed in 2022 while Lance was hurt. But the advantage in experience would lead the 49ers to consider Brock Purdy to be their QB1. The advantage in experience combined with the actual resume, which because of the experience has given Brock Purdy an opportunity to make it much more robust than Trey Lance's. Lance was never in the running to be QB1 when Purdy was healthy. I've said that all along. Well, that's come true too. So number one's come true. Number two has come true. And then early on in camp, I reported number three, that Trey Lance was struggling with short throw consistency at camp. I also said that Trey Lance was more accurate than he was in the past and that he was impressing in some ways. But it seemed like a lot of people were going absolute gaga over Trey Lance being, oh, he must be the best quarterback at camp because the completion percentage is better. But this wasn't really reflective of the truth. Lance wasn't as good in the red zone as Brock Purdy, and Purdy was extremely efficient in the red zone. And Lance hadn't been as good in move the ball sessions as Brock Purdy. And those are the most important parts of practice. Plus, Brock Purdy was going and rolling against the first team defense, and Trey Lance wasn't rolling against exclusively the first team defense. So it was total apples and oranges. The 49ers weren't even treating this as a competition, yet a lot of the outside, for some reason, was trying to frame it that way. But now we look back at what the last few weeks have been like, and these three pillars that we established at the start of camp have all shown through as being true. Right? We saw Lance against the Raiders. He struggled with the short game. He was not nearly as effective as Brock Purdy was last year, for example, in moving that offense. And he was working against second and third team defenders of the Las Vegas Raiders. And obviously, he was just a grade below what the 49ers would need from a floor perspective to even be QB2. Lance is going to have to get a lot better moving forward. I think the only correct Lance conclusion right now that we can possibly make is that time is needed for conclusions. And this is a problem that everybody, it seems, is jumping to one conclusion or the other in regards to Trey Lance, because having a definitive take might sell better. I don't know why right now. But a lot of people are saying that they think Trey Lance is trash. A lot of people are saying that, Trey Lance would have been better if the offensive line is better. I mean, of course, any quarterback would be better if the O-line's better. But to just far-reaching statements don't make any sense at this point. Because all that I could really definitively glean from the outing that I saw from Trey Lance on Sunday, that He wasn't on time with his throws. He missed some gimmies that he should have made. He looked a little, obviously, indecisive in the pocket. That led to him not being on time. He made a few good throws as well. He didn't have great pass protection in front of him. All I could tell is that this was a really raw quarterback who still needs more time to develop. Now, the problem for the 49ers, and it's not really a problem. Let's not call it a problem, because Brock Purdy came and solved a lot of problems when he emerged last year. But the situation that the 49ers are dealing with is that Lance is still eminently raw, because they're planning to develop him in 2021 and 2022, yet he was hurt both of those seasons. He's still eminently raw, and Brock Purdy has taken over, and you have to focus on winning the Super Bowl now. You have to go with your best quarterback as far as how you're going to divide reps in practice. So the issue that the 49ers have right now is that Lance needs reps to get better, but the 49ers don't have reps to give him. As you saw at practice today, Brock Purdy threw 22 times, Lance threw only 6 times. So as we get closer to the season, they have to focus on Purdy, and there is no justification for trying to focus on Lance. That's why they're not doing it, right? So he's stuck in between a rock and a hard place. That being said, the 49ers will probably be incentivized to carry Trey Lance on their 53-man roster and give him as much time as possible to develop behind the scenes. Some people are talking trade. It's not out of the question. Some people are saying, the 49ers will cut Trey Lance. I think that is out of the question, because Lance is commanding a lot of money that's fully guaranteed as the number 3 overall pick. The 49ers just decided to cut this guy and have a room of Brock Purdy, Sam Darnold, and Brandon Allen. Well, that would mean that they would actually incur more of a cap charge than if they kept him, because there'd be a lot of dead money on the hit, right? So I don't think you do that. You can potentially toss out Trey Lance's contract to another team that's willing to absorb it in a trade, but what's his trade value right now, right? He struggled mightily against the Raiders. Anybody else hasn't really seen him play in over 2 years. It's a total wild card at this moment. There could be one sucker. There could be a team that sees a ton in Trey Lance and they want to ship a ton to the 49ers, but I think we could read the room and read the market and realize, maybe a trade isn't the best idea. It depends on what's more valuable to you. Is quarterback insulation more valuable to you if you're the 49ers, or is at best the mid-round pick that would come your way for Lance more valuable to you, along with some cap relief? And the 49ers are a team that lost all of its quarterbacks last year, and in tragic fashion, they dropped the NFC Championship game as a result. So this is a team that's looked to insulate its quarterback room all offseason with as robust of a unit as possible. That's why they signed Sam Darnold. That's why they're really excited about Brock Purdy returning. And I think that's why they'll be incentivized in all likelihood to keep Trey Lance on this roster. They know that he needs time, and they could give him some semblance of it as a scout team guy behind the scenes. And hell, if last year repeats itself, the 49ers don't want that. You can knock on wood. Trey Lance can be one of the quarterbacks waiting in the wings, and then he actually will get some of those game reps. This is another option power situation. I talked about this so much when they had Jimmy Garoppolo when he was hurt in 2022. I said, you don't cut him for nothing. You don't trade him for peanuts. You let this play out and you keep him under contractual control as long as you possibly can. Trey Lance is not as good of a quarterback as Jimmy Garoppolo, but he still is a potentially valuable asset for the 49ers. So there's no reason to cut bait sooner rather than later. Now, if you're blown away by a trade offer, you find a trade offer that you think is very fair, that would improve your football team, of course you do it. But that's got to outweigh the need to have quarterback depth. Now, there's a chance they really like Brandon Allen, which I think they do, and they think they can only take 3 on the 53-man roster due to roster constraints. Well, then you take Purdy, you take Darnold, you take Allen, Lance the odd man out. Possibly, but I still don't think that you cut bait with Lance unless you get a significant return. I don't know what the 49ers will deem significant, but I think that they probably have to have some sort of idea in their head. And if they don't get it, well, I think that Lance is still more of an asset. He may not be a better quarterback than Brandon Allen, but I think that he is a more valuable asset than Brandon Allen because of his youth, because of his draft pedigree. There still might be some takers on that front. So that's the Trey Lance situation. That's the truth of it. That's where the 49ers are right now. I've always said this was going to, just organize itself organically, right? The 49ers were waiting to see if Brock Purdy would truly be healthy. It looks like he's truly ready to, or at least on track to be healthy for week 1, take all the reps. That's great. They wanted to see how Sam Darnold would respond within the context of Kyle Shanahan's offense. So far, so good. Not a lot of boneheaded errors for Sam Darnold, only one interception. They also wanted to see if they could get some improvement out of Trey Lance. And I do think that they've seen some of that improvement out of Trey Lance. The accuracy has been better. The fundamentals have been better. And, this was his first game action in about a year, coming off a serious ankle injury. Maybe his decisiveness, maybe his ability to pull the trigger, to let it rip, is going to be better on Saturday. Again, we've already seen so much of this organically play out just as we expected it to. Why don't we wait a little bit longer? We have 2 more preseason games for the 49ers to go through to see if it continues to organically play itself out, because that will determine what the 49ers end up doing here before the inflection point, which is the 53-man cut down. I also want to talk about offensive line and defensive line depth, because I think those are 2 of the 49ers' Super Bowl determinants. So for that, we're going to pop open the 90-man roster. You can also follow along on this sucker. We turned this into a 53-man projection, by the way. There you go. The 53-man projection that Barrows and I wrote, that is up on The Athletic. I can maybe share that in a bit. But I've talked so much about O-line depth in recent shows. We could, very quickly go over it again. It's right here. And maybe it makes more sense to just highlight this part right there. The 49ers very recently, I think it was today, worked out 3 offensive tackles. Why did they work out offensive tackles? Well, I think that they are a little thin at offensive tackle in terms of quality depth. Jalen Moore wasn't good against the Las Vegas Raiders. I have him penciled in as the swing tackle right now, but I use pencil instead of pen in my vocabulary because I think that Matt Pryor and Leroy Watson are both outperforming Jalen Moore at this point. The inexperience for Leroy Watson is obviously a point of concern. So we can't, we can't immediately slot him above Jalen Moore. We might be able to slot Matt Pryor above him, but the 49ers did work out Jesse Davis, Rashad Hill, and Ty Nsekhe. Those are 3 offensive tackles, and I think that they clearly want to upgrade this room. They're going to have to cut somebody from this 90-man roster to make room if they do decide to sign one of those players. But as I said a few days ago, there's a chance that the swing tackle for the 2023 San Francisco 49ers is not yet on this team's roster, and they're going to have to find a quality swing tackle. So that's the offensive line situation. I know that Keith Ishmael, I know that Ilm Manning so far has been working at left tackle. He's a little short, though, at 6'2". They probably still view him as a guard, but to me, it's interesting that he's been working and succeeding at that tackle position. Defensive line depth. How's it looking here? Drake Jackson returning to practice. That's good for the 49ers. Farrell, Givens, Kinlaw, Bryant. They want to see a little bit more out of Kinlaw. Maybe they see it this week. I do think the 49ers are really excited to see Kinlaw playing alongside the first unit in wave rotations because that could be where he could use his prodigious strength to really take a step up. Then I've got Kerry Hyder, who's been playing well, has been playing end this year, not defensive tackle. It might be time to promote somebody like Marlon Davidson, who Kerry Hyder was talking about. Marlon Davidson, former second-round pick. I think he's going to make the 53-man roster. I'm going to have to cut somebody to make Davidson fit on the 53-man roster. But based on what the 49ers are talking about, they're very, very happy with Marlon Davidson and how well he has been playing. The second-round pick out of Alabama. Remember, they need defensive tackle depth. I know they picked up Javon Hargrave, but they ran out of depth there last year. They only had 3 sacks from defensive tackles on the whole season, and that was 20 games. So let's see what that depth does end up looking like for the 49ers. I don't think that Spencer Waege has been as great as he was to open camp. Kalia Davis is probably close to returning to practice. He was in full pads, working off on the side now. T.Y. McGill did some nice stuff last year, but at the end of the day, he was just a guy for the 49ers, and they want more than just a guy. That's why all eyes are on Javon Kinlaw and Javon Hargrave and even Eric Armstead on that inside. All right, it's time for 49ers Q&A. Let's get this one fired up. 176 comments. That's crazy. Going to be in the Marina tonight, Marina, North Beach, Chinatown, checking out all of the above. Last night we were at the Giants game. Still a fun city. I know it's San Francisco. I know downtown's not what it used to be, but the neighborhoods are popping. You know, San Francisco has 47 neighborhoods in 49 square miles. There's a great book. It's stacked up behind me. It's one of the books there. It's called Season of the Witch. Talks about the 49ers and the Cowboys. And it talks about a lot of the neighborhoods of San Francisco. But everybody post your questions. No, there are no updates on Nick Bosa. I was on the radio. They interviewed me this morning on 95.7 The Game. I said it's like a game of chicken. Two cars driving up against each other. Neither car's going to swerve until it's closer to the other car. And I think that you're going to get ultimate closeness at around week 1, right? When the 49ers open their season. So that might be the deadline to force one or both sides to swerve in this game of chicken. 49ers want a better deal for their salary cap situation. Nick Bosa wants more money, obviously. I think neither side is in the wrong here. It's just business. Will Purdy play this preseason? Kyle Shanahan's not sure yet about this weekend. If he does it like he did in the past, then we'll see a couple series from the starters in Purdy, and then we'll see a full half in the dress rehearsal game week 3 against the Chargers, which is the following Friday. I tend to think, why would they change what they were doing in previous years? It seemed to have worked for getting the roster ready to go. So I think that he will play a little bit. But if he doesn't, I would think that he definitely would play in week 3 because you want him out there before the regular season starts just to knock off some of that game time rust. What's the deal with Isaiah Oliver? Well, Isaiah Oliver weighs 205 pounds, and it's not a bad thing. It's just the 49ers picked a bigger-bodied nickel back because they want to defend the run better. They want to defend big slots better. They want to defend tight ends better. It's like offenses around the league are emulating what the 49ers are doing with teams. They're bulking up. So Isaiah Oliver has the body type to defend that kind of football, but he struggles a bit against shiftier slot receivers. If that's the case, the 49ers need to find shiftier nickel cornerbacks to mix and match with Oliver so that they can better defend the slot. So that's what's going on right now. Deshaun Jameson's working on the inside. Diamondo Lenore kicked in today, worked on the inside for the 49ers. If Ambry Thomas or Samuel Womack can take the outside corner role in nickel situations, it allows Lenore, the hyena, right, to move inside, and it gives the 49ers some power there. They also have A.J. Parker on the roster at nickel cornerback. Quantrez Knight can play a bunch of positions in the DB in the secondary. So look out for all of those players. The 49ers don't have Kyle Allen. They have Brandon Allen. Kyle Allen, Brandon Allen, different quarterbacks. I don't know if he's going to get cut. Depends on what they do with Lance, right? I think in all likelihood, you keep Lance as your 3, but stuff can shift if they find a trade partner for Lance. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do. So we'll see. But it's Brandon Allen, not Kyle Allen. I think that this might be one of the points of contention. Will Nick Bosa's contract surpass that of Aaron Donald's, $31.7 million per year? I tend to say yes, but it's going to be tough. But I think that winning Defensive Player of the Year last year gave Nick Bosa a lot of credibility. All right, more questions, please. Not going to put comments up there, but I'll put some good questions up there. The D-line depth might have taken a little bit of step back, but the front line strength is definitely better. As you can see on the front line, assuming Bosa comes back soon, you're going to have him, Armstead, Hargrave. I mean, that's a trio at the top the 49ers didn't have last year. But they don't have that edge veteran presence that they did last year with Charles Omenihu, Sansa Mebucom. Drake Jackson can make up for that in a heartbeat if he delivers for the 49ers, but he's going to have to deliver for the 49ers. That's key. Obviously, you've got Cleveland Farrell. Maybe he can become an Ebucom or Charles Omenihu. If that happens, that's big for the 49ers. You've got Austin Bryant on the other side. He dealt with injuries in Detroit. I think their depth on the interior is much better than it was in the past. It's the exterior that's worse, at least on paper, because you don't have your Amenahus um, or your Sansa Mebucoms or your Jordan Willises, but they're different guys, right? And Kerry Hyder's back to the outside, which is big for the 49ers as well. We'll see how Chris Kocurek makes this all work. A lot of the questions I'm seeing now, I've already answered, so make sure that you rewatch the show a little bit later. D. Winters had looked really fast. He was flying from sideline to sideline. So was Jalen Graham. I talked to D. Winters today. So both of these rookie linebackers I have on the inside of my roster projection at this point. Yep. As you can see here, I even officially moved D. Winters to the inside. Hyder's back at defensive end for the 49ers. We got a Purdy real deal fan here. I know Drake Jackson was gassed toward the end of the year in 2022. Has he worked on his conditioning? Also, that says, I don't know what you're talking about Bosa's rookie season. But yes, Drake Jackson has worked on his conditioning. He's bigger and stronger too right now. But he was in the offseason. He was in the 49ers building all offseason. All right. How about one more? One more question. Let's get this done. I think that Greasy has a better track record, at least with the 49ers, than Rich Scangarello did. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo's the before and after variable, right? Jimmy Garoppolo had an interception rate in the high twos, 2.7% in the old system, and that went down to 1.3% with Brian Greasy. I think the drills have been much more diversified under Brian Greasy. That's just what I can tell from the naked eye. Obviously, having Christian McCaffrey last year helped the QBs a lot in terms of interception rate because of the safety valve, but the results seem to have been a lot better. I mean, they developed Brock Purdy instantaneously, it seemed like, with Brian Greasy. Jimmy Garoppolo had his cleanest year with the 49ers, so I think the proof is in the pudding there. I mean, yeah, Ilm Manning continues to impress. I think ultimately they might still want Ilm Manning as a guard first because he is shorter of stature. He is only 6'2", but if he can continue to deliver clean sheets at tackle, he could be a Swiss Army knife for the 49ers moving forward. All right, everybody, thank you for joining. Nice little show. We went 37 minutes today. Not quite 49, but that's about right, what we went today. Why don't everybody check out the article that I posted about Brock Purdy and the interception rate and what Kyle Shanahan thinks about that. Like the video, sub to the channel, sub to The Athletic, do all that good stuff. And we'll talk to you all very soon. Take care.